This is DW International. I am Mulgeta Asafa and my guest is Feven Teklehaymanot, a psychiatrist and teacher at Mekelle University, Aider Referral Hospital. Welcome, Feven.
Thank you. We'll stay.
May you introduce yourself to our viewers?
Sure. My name is Feven Teklehaymanot. I'm a psychotherapist, a clinical psychologist, and also a lecturer in Mekelle University, Aider campus. I'm working on the psychiatry department, on the teaching students, and also in practice giving talk therapy or psychotherapy for the patients who develop mental illness, different sorts of mental illness. I've been working in Mekelle University for the past 3 years now, and I spent 6 months from the 8 months all the genocide war occurred in all over Tigray, around the central and the northwestern Tigray, including Aksum, Adit, which is Daga Berhe, Daga Salus, Samama, until Ahsa'a, Rama, Farima. It's around, I think, 20 rural and urban areas. I've been giving mental health and psychosocial support for the survivors of different sorts of the genocidal atrocity, which is mainly genocidal rape, and like, for example, children who have been shot, who have heavy weapon blast injury. So I've been providing the mental health and psychosocial support who survive different sorts of genocidal atrocity and violences.
Thank you very much. What happened in Tigray in those 8 months when the genocidal war occurred in all over Tigray, especially outside Mekelle?
I think the first statement that I would use to express what happened in Tigray is that there is nothing left in the whole world that didn't happen. The worst things that happened in the whole world that have been happening in Tigray in those 8 months when the genocidal atrocities, when the genocidal war was happening in all over Tigray. So the statement that I would use is the worst things that happened in Tigray, the worst things that happened in the world have been happening in Tigray, and the things that never happened in the whole world also have been happening in Tigray. So when we describe what the worst things that happened in all over the world, and also that never happened even in the world, was that the first thing is a genocidal rape. I call it genocidal, not because I like the word or not because people are saying it, but because I've seen it, because I was there when the survivors survived such an atrocity, characteristic and a future that fulfill a genocidal rape. So the first thing was genocidal rape was committed in all over Tigray, in Tigrayan women, girls, and also children. So the first thing was genocidal rape. The second thing was anyone who was, especially outside Mekelle. I'm speaking from experience that I've been in central and northwestern areas. So anyone who was in Tigray when the genocidal war was happening experienced something that the whole world doesn't even have a word for it. I always say, speaking from the experience, that means I always say we might need a new word that we have to coin for our experiences that happened in Tigray. But since we only have words that we already agreed on, for example, we call it genocidal rape in the whole world. That means the characteristics in the futures that fulfill the genocidal rape. If it happened somewhere, we call it genocidal rape. We call it sexual violence. We call it, for example, for children's shooting and heavy weapon blast injuries and everything. We already have words that we coined in the whole world. That's what we're using right now. So we're going to use that. But I recommend, and I've been saying this in every opportunity that I get, that we might need to coin our own word. For example, Israelis, they have their own word to describe what happened to them. It was some sort of, I don't know, a gruesome that the other world didn't experience, so they call it a Holocaust. So I think we might need a right word that can describe the things that we experience in the 8 months, and it's also ongoing right now. So if I have to recommend, I would say that we have to coin a new name. But since we have a word already that we can communicate in the whole world, I would say genocidal rape has been committed, and I think it's still is ongoing, especially in the areas that the Eritrean troops, the Amhara Defense Forces, and the Ethiopian National Defense are in control, especially in the western area. The genocidal rape is still ongoing. Tigrayan women's, girls and children are being raped in a very brutal and horrific way. So I would say the genocidal rape is what has been committed in the past 8 months, and also there are also other genocidal atrocities, a brutal one that happened in Tigray. But I think we can also go detail on this. In general, that's what happened in the past 8 months when the genocidal war was occurring in all over Tigray.
By whom did it happen? According to the survivors' testimony you gathered.
This is only from my experience and from only the survivors that I was privileged to see. And it doesn't describe or it doesn't tell about who was in Tigray in the genocidal war. It doesn't describe who involved in the genocidal war. This is only my experience and my survivors' testimony. And according to their testimony, there are 3 main bodies or defense forces that were involved and perpetrated a genocidal rape and other atrocities on the survivors. The first one is the Ethiopian National Defense Forces. So most of the survivors, according to, I took only 60 samples, and from the 60 samples, I described which one is, how many of them were perpetrated by whom. So the first one, the highly perpetrated, from the highly perpetrated forces were the Ethiopian National Defense Force. The second one is the Eritrean troops. And the third one is Amhara Defense Forces. They have different sorts of names. Some call them Fano, some are militias, and other. So I would say there were 3 main defense forces, and different forces, of course, who are not even in a country level. So I would say the Ethiopian National Defense Force, the Eritrean troops, and Amhara Defense Forces.
Okay, gender-based violence versus wartime rape and genocidal rape. What is their similarity and difference?
Gender-based violence, it's commonly used, the first characteristic of gender-based violence is a sort of violence which is perpetrated on someone solely and firstly, primarily, because of their gender. So it might include a lot of things. It includes rape, it includes sexual violence in general, it also includes sexual female mutilation, early marriage, and different. So it includes a lot of things. It's like an umbrella, but the primary feature of gender-based violence is it's solely and primarily depend on the gender. So when someone experiences gender-based violence, it's because she is a female. So it's an act or violence that perpetrated on someone based on her gender, and it includes a lot of things. Like I say, it's an umbrella, so it includes sexual violence. In the sexual violence, there's harassment, there is rape, there is sexual assault, and different things. And there's also domestic violence, female mutilation. It could be also early marriage and different sorts. This is gender-based violence in general. The mainly violence that we call is the sexual violence. Sexual violence is one sort of gender-based violence. It's a form of gender-based violence, of course, but it's any sexual act which is non-consensual. The girl, the woman, or the child didn't give any consent. When it's a child, even if she gives a consent, since she is an underage, it's not considered as a consent. But for a woman or a girl, it's any sort of a sexual act perpetrated on a woman or a girl solely because of her gender, and non-consensually. That means she didn't give any consent for it. So it includes from even touching her inappropriately, especially in other areas that she doesn't want to be touched. It includes until rape, attempt rape, and other violences included. This is what sexual violence is. In sexual violence, the main sort of violence that we found as perpetration is rape. When it's rape from sexual violence, that means it includes penetration. So for someone for us to say it is a rape, there has to be penetration. So it might be also perpetrated on men also on women and girls, but there has to be a penetration. So it might be anal, it might be oral or vaginal, but there has to be a penetration. If there's a penetration, we call it rape. If there's no penetration, we call it attempt rape. It might be sexual assault and other things. So this is what GBV, sexual violence mainly, and rape means. There are also other sort of violences that we call that happened in Tigray, also in other areas of the whole world, which we call it a peacetime, wartime, and then also recently, in the couple of decades, there's also a genocide or rape. The first thing that I was already mentioning was the sexual violence, which is gender-based violence. The other sort, the peacetime rape, is a kind of rape which is perpetrated on a woman, or girls, or children. And if it is a peacetime rape, if you call it rape, there has to be, as I described it earlier, there has to be a penetration. But it happened, the difference is it happened in the peacetime, there is no war. And when the perpetrator perpetrates the assault or the violence or the rape, the main reason, the root for it is that the power imbalance that we have in the community. So we have a community in the whole world, not only in Ethiopia, not only in Tigray, but in the whole world, in some, even in a very civilized cities and areas, there's still a power imbalancement between women and men. And for that, always the men are superior. And because of that, it's the root for happening a peacetime rape, any gender-based violence, a sexual violence, rape, or any sort of violence, as the root is that there is a power imbalancement between two genders. That means, so the superiority of a man in the culture, it could be a norm and everything that fascinates the superiority of a man and the related norms and cultures allowed. It might not be directly, but it allowed the man, it gives him an opportunity and also the right to commit such kind of things. So the root is this one for the peacetime rape, that means. The other one is a wartime rape. I would like to define the wartime rape according to the UN definition. And the wartime rape, according to the UN definition, is that according to the UN, the wartime rape is a rape committed often intentionally. So it doesn't happen just out of that means without any intention, without any aim or goal, but it happened deliberately and intentionally. And the intention is to terrorize the group or the community that the war broke out on. So the first one is it's intended to terrorize the community. The second one is it's intended to break the family unit and structure that community has. And the third one is to destroy the community in general. So by raping their women, girls, and children, the perpetrators or the defense forces that started the war in certain areas, they wanted to destroy generally the community. That means, so the wartime rape is an intended one. It is with intention. And then the intention is that it's intended to terrorize the community, break up their family unit and structure, and destroy the community in general. This is the UN definition of the wartime rape, and it says that it's a deliberate and strategic decision on the part of the combatants to intimidate and destroy the enemy as a whole by raping their women, as I said, girls and children. And there's a labeled one, an opposition group. They call it an opposition group. So they want to destroy the opposition group by raping their women, girls, and children. And by doing this, they terrorize the community. They terrorize their defense forces. That means the opposition group defense forces. They break up their family units and structures. And finally, they are intended to destroy the community as a community. This is what a wartime rape is. So recently, I think it has been more than a couple of decades, but there's this new term that we have for other sorts of a wartime rape. It might occur during or even without a war. So it's called a genocide or rape. We've been seeing it in the whole world, especially in Rwanda. It has been perpetrated a genocide or rape in the Tutsi groups. There has been also a genocide or rape that have been committed in Bosnia case, and now what I'm claiming from what I see, from what I experienced, from the patients that I had, from the survivors' testimony, is that Tigray also, genocide and rape has been perpetrated on Tigrayan women, girls and children. So when we see what genocide and rape is, it might occur, as I explained it earlier, it might occur during war, or it might not even, there might not even be war. But the characteristic that we have for genocide and rape is, they call it, it's a brutal weapon of war. So when it's genocide and rape, it's not only gender-based. The assault, the violence has been perpetrated on women, girls and children, maybe also on men. It could also happen in male, because it's not solely depend on gender. So what genocide and rape is, it's a brutal weapon of war. So combatants, they use it purposely and deliberately and strategically as a military weapon. So the one feature or characteristic that we have for genocide and rape is that the fighting bodies, they use it as a weapon. And when we say as a weapon, not only it's not intended to affect or to rape only gender, it's also to rape ethnic. They call it, in the couple of research that I have been saying, they call it, it's an ethnic rape. It's not only a rape perpetrated on women, girls or children. It may also happen in men, it might happen on male also. So it's an ethnic rape. It's not only a rape that perpetrated on females, girls, women or children that I've been saying. So the first thing that we have at genocide and rape is it's an ethnic rape. The second one is it is strategic and deliberate. So it's intended to kick a goal. It has an aim that wants to, the combatants, it might be the defense forces, it might be the government, it might be anyone, but they have a deliberate and strategic goals that they want to kick. And by doing that, by committing the genocide and rape, they want to kick those goals that, as it might be military, it might be political, it might be economical, it might be social, it might be also psychological goals. It has certain goals that they want to kick, and by perpetrating the genocide and rape, they kick the goals that they already said that.
Okay, what are the features of the genocide and rape?
Okay. The genocide and rapes, it has its own features and characteristics that differentiated from wartime rape, general wartime rape, that also differentiated from gender-based violence, sexual violence, or any sort of peacetime rape. So the characteristic that we have is, the first characteristic is, as I call it, as I mentioned earlier, it's an ethnic rape. So when the perpetrators pick a girl or a woman or a children, it's not solely because she's a female. As I expressed it earlier, it might even be a man. So when they pick a survivor or a victim that they want to commit the rape, it's because of their ethnicity, it might be because of their race or anything. So it's an ethnic rape rather than only the gender based. So the first feature is it's an ethnic rape. The second one is, as I mentioned earlier, it's a systematic rape. So it's a deliberate one, and they committed intentionally to kick some goals. So it's a systematic, calculated, and also with intention. So the second feature is it's not a random rape that committed by riff-raff soldiers, but it's a systematic, calculated, and a systematic one intended to kick some goals. The other one is it happened publicly most of the time. So the one feature or characteristic of a genocide rape, it doesn't happen in the houses by hiding or something, but it happened collectively and publicly. So what we see in Rwanda, for example, even in Bosnia, is that they've been raping women publicly. Even in Darfur, they line up a family and a community member to watch the rape. They don't only do it publicly, but they do purposely by lining up family members and community members to witness it. So the other feature and characteristic of a genocide rape is it's a public one. It happened publicly and purposely, intentionally, lining up family members, maybe other community members like neighbors or someone who's fleeing in Tigray. That's what happened. Women and girls and children have been running for their life, and they pick one girl and rape her in front of the people who are running or fleeing for their life. So the other character is publicly raping women and intentionally lining up a family member, a community member, neighbors, anyone to witness the rape. That's the other feature or characteristic of the genocidal rape. And the other one is it happened mostly, like it's a mass rape. What we see in Tigray, what we've seen in Tigray is that they intentionally would like to rape, they attempt to rape. We don't know how many of the women and girls and children have been raped until now. But as far as we know, it was a mass rape. So they would like to rape as much as possible, like as much number, as much women, as much girls, as much children as possible. So they raped any woman they faced in front of them, fleeing in the streets, in their house by going into the house. So they raped purposely, intentionally, with an order that they don't want to pass even one girl without raping. There's this experience that is my patients shared with me during our sessions that we had in the mental health and psychosocial support, and they say that while they were fleeing for their life, even the soldiers, there was this incident that happened around the places that I were, and they were just running for their life. It was the Eritrean troops, and they were running for their life because the TDF was coming, and they were very close. And in the road, knowing that the TDF might catch them, they didn't want to pass by not raping any woman or girl in the street. So even taking the risk to be killed, taking the risk to be harmed by the TDF who's coming back to them, which was very close, they were raping women as many as they can before being killed, before being anything. So what they were saying to the survivors was that, as the survivors claim and as the survivor statement, they say that even if we die, we don't want to pass by not raping you. And when they say by raping you, they didn't say the survivor, Tigrayans in general, Tigrayan women, girls, and children. They say that even if I die, I would like to die raping a woman, raping a child, raping a girl, a Tigrayan one. That means they were representing a group. So it was a mass rape. That's the other characteristics of genocidal rape. The other one is the intention is not to gain a sexual pleasure. The main feature of a genocidal rape is that the soldiers, the troops, the different forces, when they commit the sexual violence, when they commit the rape, it's not because they want to have a sexual pleasure by raping a woman. It was because they want to degrade, disdain, humiliate, and eradicate the group. So the other feature of the genocidal rape is this. We've seen it in Rwanda, we've seen it in Bosnia, we even see it in Darfur. They were not doing the rape, they were not perpetrating the violence because they want to get a sexual pleasure. They were doing it because they hate the group, they want to eradicate the group. They want to degrade, disdain, humiliate, and eradicate the group. And that's what happened in Tigray also. So this is the other feature or characteristic of a genocidal rape. The other feature or characteristic of a genocidal rape is it's a systematic attempt to destroy the group physically by raping their women, girls, and children, psychologically, socially, militarily, by weakening the military. That all group has a fighting group. For example, in Tigray, there was a TDF, right? In other areas also. So when they committed genocidal rape, when the soldiers, the troops in different forces committed genocidal rape, what they are hoping is not to have a sexual pleasure, as I mentioned it earlier, but to weaken the defense force that is fighting for the group. So genocidal rape as a characteristic is it's a systematic attempt to weaken and destroy the group as whole. That means not only survivors, physically, socially, psychologically, militarily, politically, economically. So this is the other feature of a genocidal rape. The other feature or characteristic of a genocidal rape is perpetrators don't usually use their genitals. They also use inanimate objects. Even in Tigray, we also, researchers have been saying a lot about this in Darfur, Democratic Republic of Congo, Bosnia and Rwanda, that the perpetrators for perpetrating a genocidal rape on the group while they're doing it in survivors, they don't only use their genitals, they use inanimate objects. For example, in Tigray, according to my experience only, that means survivors have been claiming that they were using inanimate objects for two reasons. The first reason is to rape the survivor. The second reason is to damage her reproductive system. So they use three common things in Tigray. The first one was a stick, the second one is umbrella, and the third one is metal things, like anything which is iron and metal. So the other feature or characteristic of a genocidal rape is that they usually use not only their genitals but also inanimate objects, and this is not sexual. It's purely an ethnic-based violence. That's why we call it genocidal. The other feature in characteristics that we can call it in the genocidal rape is that forced impregnation. So in forced impregnation, for example, in Tigray, women have been forced to be impregnated by different forces because they want that woman, that girl, doesn't have to give a Tigrayan baby. So they want to give it, for example, an Amhara blood. They want it to start. They usually say it as the survivor statement. They say that starting from now, the Tigrayan blood will end in you. So you will have an Amharan child, you will have an Eritrean child, in some sort of things. So the other feature and characteristics of a genocidal rape is that forced impregnation. We've been seeing this also in the countries that have been perpetrated on, that has been perpetrated a genocidal rape. The other feature or characteristics of a genocidal rape is there's always sexual mutilation and sterilizing the woman's and the girl's womb. So they usually try to damage the reproductive system of the woman and girls of the group that she represents. This is the other feature or characteristics of genocidal rape. They usually strict or they usually disallow the group not to we call it, I think, within group births. So this is a human right. Any group should have and also have within group births. But when combatants, when soldiers or different forces commit a genocidal rape, they usually forbid the group. They usually disallow the group to have a within births, and that's another feature of genocidal rape. The other is they usually use sexually transmitted disease. So they deliberately and intentionally transmit, for example, the commonly transmitted disease that even in other countries that we see in their research and studies is that HIV. So they deliberately infect women with HIV/AIDS and other sexually transmitted diseases. This is the other feature and characteristics. So generally when we see the genocidal rape, it's a widespread, calculated and systematic rape.
Okay. What kind of psychological and social impacts did it left on survivors and people of Tigray?
I think before we see the psychosocial impacts that the genocidal rape left on Tigrayan women, girls and children, I think we have to see the features that happen. For example, the forms of genocidal rape that has been committed in Tigrayans. I would like to mention that first. And the first one that happened in Tigray, in Tigrayan women, girls and children, is gang rape. So according to my experience, according to the patients that I have, only one woman, one girl has been raped by 16 soldiers, for one, that means. So many has been raped by 2 or more than 2 soldiers or troops or for different forces. So the first feature that we have, the first form of genocidal rape that Tigrayan women, girls and children experience is a gang rape. And as I mentioned it earlier, they have been raped from by one soldier until 16 soldiers for one woman. So that was the first form. The second form was Tigrayan children, especially speaking from my experience, have been raped on 2 days. In my experience, I will never forget this, and I don't want anyone to forget this one. I also included in the book that I'm writing currently. And there was an 8-year-old child. She was spending a family time in her family with her mother and other siblings that she has in the family. And the Eritrean troops have been in the area, in their village, that means. So at one night, they came to their house and they took her, the 8-year-old child. They didn't touch anyone else. They say, we want her, and they took her. She was just only 8. And they took her. They've been raping her for 2 days. And God knows how many of them, nobody knows how many of them raped her. The family only knows she had been continuously and repeatedly raped by the Eritrean soldiers who have been in the camp that they prepared for themselves in the village. And after they raped her, after she became unconscious, they sent a message for the family to take her. And when she, it was very hard militarily and politically to have a health care service at that time. So there was a lot of obstacles, but finally when they reached to us, we couldn't save her life. So she was raped on 2 days. And this is not only a one-person story. This is not only a one-child story. It's a story that Tigrayans share in general. This has been happening in many areas. I'm just sharing this from my experience. So the other form of sexual violence that we call genocide or rape, that the Tigrayans experience was raping on 2 days. Tigrayan women, girls, and children have been raped on 2 days. This is the other form of sexual violence that we experience in Tigray. And the other one is the perpetrators, all sorts of perpetrators, the Eritrean troops, the Ethiopian National Defense Force, and the Amhara different forces. They were not only using their genitals while they were raping the woman, they were also using inanimate objects. As I mentioned it earlier, the survivors claimed that there were 3 objects that the perpetrators commonly used: stick, metal, and umbrella. And can you imagine when someone uses an umbrella to rape a woman, to put it in woman's reproductive system for 2 reasons? That means so as to damage her reproductive system, and 2 is to be fascinated by raping her with inanimate object, to degrade and disdain her community and her group in general. So the other form of sexual violence that we call genocidal rape, the other form that the Tigrayan women, girls, and children experience is being raped not only by perpetrators' genital, but also being raped by inanimate objects. The other form is public rape. So Tigrayans have been raped anywhere. I can say this really with confidence, with 100% confidence. They have been raped in anywhere. They have been raped in religious institutions, including church and mosques. I had patients that I see. There was this patient that I see. She was raped right in front of the church. She was going out. They caught her, and they want to humiliate the whole followers of the religion, not only her. She was with her mother and aunts and neighbors, but they forced all the followers of their Christianity to stand there and to watch the assault. They raped her for 3. And the other form is public rape. So as I mentioned it earlier, they have been raped in religious institutions. They have been raped in public business centers. There was this patient that I had. She was raped right in her. What she does is she sells tea, and she has a coffee shop, and her daily routine, her business is to sell tea and coffee mainly. So these soldiers came to her center. They say go out for the rest of the customers that she had at the time, and then they raped her right there. All the people around the business center, the one who was like passing, and everyone was listening the violence. So there was a rape in the business centers. There were rape when women was fleeing. They caught her and they raped her publicly in the street, in the roads. So I would say this boldly, really. There was no any place that was like a protection for a woman or a Tigrayan woman, girl or children when the genocide was happening. So the other form of the genocidal rape was that the women, girls, and children of Tigray have been raped anywhere. In religious institutions, in public areas, in piazzas, everywhere, in the street, in the roads, even in the cliffs. Some of the survivors that I had in providing the mental health and psychosocial support was that they hide in the cliff, and they came and they raped them even in the cliff, inside the cliff. That means so. The other form of sexual violence that we see in Tigray is that a public rape. The other one is they mutilate and sterilize the Tigrayan woman and girl's womb. So the other form of sexual violence or genocidal rape form or feature that we see in Tigray is they damage the Tigrayan women, girls and children reproductive system in general. They have their own goals, we might raise it later, but they mutilate and sterilize Tigrayan womb. The other one was, it wasn't only women and girls that has been raped in Tigray. Children also have been raped in Tigray. So from my experience, from 8 years up to 75 years, that means 8 years old child up to 75 years old grandmother, that means who survived the genocidal rape. So the other form is the rape of children. The other is they forced a family member of a survivor to rape the woman or girl or child of the member, the family member. So Tigrayan women, girls and children have been raped by their own father forcefully. They have been raped by their uncle. They have been raped by other family member. If they don't have a family member, they usually call a neighbor to rape the child or the girl or the woman. So the other form that we see in Tigray, in genocidal rape that have been committed in Tigray, is they forced a family members or a neighbor to rape another family member. The other one is sexual slavery. This is not a common thing. None of this is a common thing, really. And sexual slavery is another thing. I mean, they kidnap a woman or a girl that they face in the street, from their home, from anywhere. They kidnap her forcefully. They take her to the camp that they prepare for themselves, and then they rape them continuously, repeatedly. It might be for 1 month, continuously, every single day, forcing them to be their sexual slave, forcing them to be their physical slave also. So the other form of genocidal rape that the Tigrayans experience is sexual enslavement. The other one is there was a brutal physical violence in torturing them while raping them, that means. So committing the genocidal rape, they also include a physical abuse, torturing them purposely and deliberately, and also using verbal abuse, ethnic-based slurs. There are words, insulting words that they use that can describe the group which they think. So there was a brutal physical and verbal violence, ethnic-based verbal violence in torturing them while also raping them. The final feature of or form of a genocidal rape that has been perpetrated in Tigray is that, you know, I don't want to say that our culture, norm, or anything is different from the whole world. I don't want to say that. I mean, any culture and value and any family unit structure, religion and everything, it has its own characteristic, and any group has its own unique value and culture. And in Tigray, what the survivors have been claiming is that they have been raped in the way that they never know it exists. Most of the survivors that I have been seeing who survived anal sexual violence, they say that they didn't even know that there is such a thing in the whole world. They didn't know that there was a sexual intercourse that happened in anal way. They don't know there is an oral sexual intercourse in general. And they say that it doesn't go with our culture, it doesn't go with my value, and that has a significant psychological impact. By being raped by a form that you never know that it exists. And for some, they know that it exists, but it's a condemned one. It's condemned by their value, their culture, and their religion especially. So this one, it has a significant and severe psychological damage to my patients. So the final form of sexual violence that we call it genocidal rape, that the Tigrayans experience, is they have been raped in any form, in anal, oral, and vaginal way. And for some, they didn't even know there's other form of sexual violence other than vaginal. So for them, it was very weird, that it was very strange, and it was, I've seen them, for example, there was this patient that I saw, and I remember it took a day for her to stop crying because she has been raped anally. And she couldn't stop crying, and she was overwhelmed. I remember her face, her eyes, and everything. She couldn't accept that she was raped that way.
She may feel that she is committing a sin.
Yes, for some, yes. And as I already said, for most of them, they don't know that there was this form of sexual violence, an oral and an anal one. For others, they know it exists, for some of them, but as I said, it's condemned, and they say that I have been raped by the way that the churches teach that it is condemned and it's satanic. And for that, they say that their soul is dirty after they have been raped. And I say, you have been raped, you have to know that. We have to know the definition of rape. It's non-consensual. It's without your consent. You didn't give a consent to be raped this way. You didn't give a consent to be even touched. But for her, she said that this is a condemned one by my religion. They have been teaching us in church, and now I've been raped in that way, and now I have a dirty soul. So the last form that the Tigrayan women, girls, and children have been forced to experience, finally, is they have been raped in any form, anally and also orally, including to the vaginal sex, the vaginal sexual violence, that means.
What kind of support did you provide to these survivors?
I think the psychosocial impact that it left on survivors. I've never seen something like this. I've been working in the teaching hospital. As I told you, I'm working in Mekelle University at their campus, and it's a teaching hospital. We have a hospital, and most of our work is to provide a psychotherapy for any person who survived different sorts of abuse. It might be child abuse, but also it might be rape recently. And I've been providing a psychosocial support for any person who developed a mental illness. It might be due to abuse, or it might not even be due to abuse. But I have never seen such kind of people with such kind of psychological impact. It was intense. I don't know how to describe it. The symptoms that they show, we need to have an indigenous understanding of the symptoms of the mental illness that our survivors, our patients, show because of the genocidal war atrocities, specifically because of the genocidal rape. But in the beginning, as I said it, we only have a communicated way of understanding of, for example, we have a DSM that we call in our profession. So there is some sort of symptoms, and if anyone fulfills the symptoms, then you call that person, they have such kind of disorder or such kind of mental illness. We need to have an indigenous understanding of the mental illness by our own. But until then, the psychosocial impact that the survivors were showing, the first disorder was PTSD. Commonly, most of the survivors that I was providing mental health and psychosocial support, they develop PTSD. PTSD is a post-traumatic stress disorder, mostly after experiencing a traumatic experience or a violence, a very brutal one like we saw in Tigray. So most of them, they develop a post-traumatic stress disorder. Hopefully we will have a session that we can talk about mental disorders that develop after genocidal rape and their solutions also in other session that we might have Mulugeta. But for today, I only would like to mention the names. So the first one was PTSD, the post-traumatic stress disorder. The other common mental disorder that I saw in my patients that I was following was anxiety disorder. It might be different sorts of anxiety disorder. The most common one was generalized anxiety disorder. So most of the survivors after the genocidal rape, they show the symptom of anxiety disorder. The third common mental illness, that depression. So comorbidly sometimes. For example, many patients who fulfill the criteria of post-traumatic disorder, they also show depression disorder together. So they have PTSD and also depression as a comorbid mental illness. But the common other mental illness that the survivors that I have been treating show that depression. Other than this, I think the psychosocial impact that not only the survivors but also the community members who experience direct trauma and also indirect trauma, it left them a permanent scar, a permanent physical, psychological, and social scar in the survivors mainly, but also in the community members. The other psychological impact is that most of the survivors, they feel shame and guilt. They say that because of the rape that they survive, as I told you earlier, the forms were very different than we usually experience in the peacetime, and that's the characteristics and features that forced us to say it's genocide or rape. And after they survive that, they usually feel shame and guilt. And we've been working on this on my patients. I always work on the shame and guilt. The first thing that I do is I help them to develop coping skills and to accept that it's not their fault. And the shame and the guilt, they shouldn't feel that. The perpetrators has to feel the shame and the guilt, and not the survivors. But the other psychological impact is all of the time. Most of the patients, they feel shame and guilt. The other thing is fear and anxiety. Whether they have it as a disorder or not, most of the survivors, they have been living in the fear. I wasn't able to see them in the past 1 year since, the problem right now we have. There's no fuel, there's no transportation, I couldn't visit them. But during the genocidal war, when it was occurring during Tigray, even though it's ongoing, it's still ongoing, they were living in intense and excessive fear. And since the defense forces, most of the defense forces, like the Eritrean troops, they were always in the village, in the survivors' village. The Ethiopian National Defense Force was also in Tigray. The Amharian Defense Forces were there, so they feel that they might be raped again. But because of a lot of rational reasons, they lived in fear, and I don't know how they are feeling right now. They were also feeling anxiety, they were feeling depression. Most of the patients, they feel depressed after the genocidal rape they survive. And the other very common symptom that I see, the other very severe psychological impact that I see in survivors was that they were forced to relive the sexual violence that they survive. It's not for them, for the survivor, it didn't only happen once. They feel like it's happening all over again every single day. We call it reliving it, and the other symptom was persistent nightmare. So they feel like they are reliving it, they are really re-experiencing it. But most of the survivors that I was providing the mental health and psychosocial support, they had persistent nightmare. That we worked on some, especially with the psychosocial impact, with the psychosocial support. The social impact that it left not only on survivors, I believe, on the case studies that I see, I think the social impact was only on survivors, but also on the community, in the group in general. And the first social impact that it left on survivors in the community is it damaged and destroyed the survivor, first primarily, her family, the family unit that we have, the group as a group, and the social structure that we have. This is the first social impact that I learned in the 6 months that I was providing the mental health and psychosocial support. The second social impact is that it breaks the social fabric, values, and cultures that we have as Tigrayans. And the third one is it was one way of torturing not only the survivor, but also the group as a group. I mean, it's a torture, it's a way of torturing it. So the other social impact is that the perpetrator left on not only the survivor, but the community or the group in general. It's one torturing way. So the group has been tortured, I believe. The group as a group, that means Tigrayans have been tortured by the genocidal rape that have been happening in Tigrayan women, girls, and children. The other social impact is they have been working very hard intentionally to disdain the group. And I think for some survivors and community members, they feel like they have been disdained. And this is the other social impact that I've seen and that I have witnessed in survivors and other participants of group therapies. The other social impact is they disallow, the perpetrators disallow within group births. So most of the survivors, they have now genocidal rape babies that we have to work on. And the other social impact that it left on us is it disallowed Tigrayans the within births that they have as any right they have as human. The other is it shattered, I believe. This is only based on the the observation that I have on my survivors and the communities that I have been able to see. And it shattered the structure, the family structure, the cultural structure, and the religious structure also. Most of the survivors, they say that they don't have religion anymore because of the genocide and rape they survived. They say that they don't have God, they don't have, you know, anything related to the things, the religious things, the spiritual things that they used to believe. This is a huge impact that it left on the survivors and the community members. So I believe that based on my observation, it shattered the structures that we have, family structures, cultural structures, religious structures that we built for years. And the last social impact that I observe in my studies is that they have created a collective memory for the group, not only for survivors. This is not the story of women, girls, and children who survived genocide or rape. This is a story of a generation, a whole generation, a Tigrayan generation. And I think the last social impact it left is it created a collective, not a good one, a negative collective memory for all of us. This is the other social impact. So what I have been providing is that I've been providing a mental health and psychosocial support for the symptoms that I already told you, or both the psychological and social impact it left on them. I have been providing a mental health and psychosocial support as much as it was possible for me to provide it. I've provided for 6 months. I've been able to see more than 300 patients. I would like to know how they are doing right now. But right then, it was a great relief for them to receive mental health and psychosocial support.
What kind of support should be provided to the survivors and to the group in general within the international community, Tigrayan diasporas and Ethiopians?
Okay. I think this is not only, for example, if the siege stopped, what we are planning to do, even though we are planned or not, this is not only going to be 1 or 2 year work. It's going to take decades to work on the reparation, to work on the rehabilitation of Tigray in general. So psychosocially, economically, politically, in any way, to repair and also to rehabilitate the community members, the survivors, whether they experience a direct or indirect trauma. Believe me, it's going to take more than decades. It's going to take 10 years or 20 years. We've seen it in Rwanda, we've seen it in Bosnia, and it's ongoing. It's a transgenerational, it has a transgenerational impact, especially psychosocially. So the works that we are going to work, it's not going to be a 1 year, 2 year, or 3 year work. It's going to be a work that we're going to work for years. And I would like to start by, I don't believe that what happened in Tigray is being narrated in the right way that happened in Tigray. So I think the first thing that we have to do is that we have to narrate to the world, the whole world, to Ethiopians and the rest of the world, to see what exactly happened in Tigray. So the first assignment that we have, especially for the people who see what happened in Tigray, by seeing the survivors, by being in the areas that happened the most brutal and the most unspoken atrocities, we have an assignment to show this to the whole world. The first thing that we have to do is that. And the second thing is that the support that we're going to provide, it's not going to be only individualistic. For example, I told you that I've been seeing more than 300 patients, but there are survivors, there are hundreds of thousands for sure. So, and there are the direct survivors. There's also indirect trauma. For example, children have been forced to see the sexual violence their mother survived and everything. So it's a collective trauma. It's not trauma, or it's not a violence perpetrated individually on some people. It's a collective one. It has been perpetrated on Tigrayans. So our intervention has to be collective. I believe a community-based interventions has to be planned, projected in a big and huge projects, and being delivered to the whole community. So the second thing that I would like to recommend to anyone who's listening to this is that we have to plan, starting from now, to provide a community-based interventions in multidimensional way. This is our second thing. I think the third thing that I would like to say is, I would like to say to anyone who would like to hear and accept this and provide their help, I would like to start by Ethiopians. I would like to start from them. And the first thing that I would like to say is something that happened in the whole world, and things that happened, the worst things that happened in the whole world had happened in Tigray, and it's still happening in Tigray. And I would like to call the whole Ethiopians to be voice for Tigrayans, to be voice for the survivors of the genocide rape, and to be voice for the whole community that survive a direct trauma or indirect trauma in general. So I would like to call Ethiopians to be voice for all Tigrayans, and to be voice that it has to stop, since it's still ongoing, that it has to stop, and the necessary needs, the basic needs, has to be in Tigray, and also the multidimensional support that we are planning individualistically and collectively for the whole community has to be delivered for survivors of different genocidal atrocities. The first thing that I would like to say is there's this thing that we call impunity. So in some areas, researchers say that the rape in general, sexual violence, gender-based violence, and wartime rape and genocidal rape, the reason that it's happening is because perpetrators always doesn't get what they deserve after they perpetrated such an act. So there's this thing that we call impunity. So they don't get punished after what they did. So I would like this is for us, for the whole Ethiopians, and for the whole world. Perpetrators of the genocidal rape, perpetrators of the genocidal atrocity that happened in Tigray in general, the perpetrators has to be punished. There has to be accountable, and they has to be punished. And this is not only for Tigrayans' sake. It's like I always say, it's not for the sake of Tigrayans. This is for the whole world. We have to teach the whole world that it's not okay to perpetrate such a brutal way of genocidal rape, such a brutal atrocities in one people, in one group, in one community, and then escape from punishment. We have to show the world, we have to teach the whole world that it's not okay to do this and to be free. So the first thing that I would like to raise for the whole world is that they have to stand and be voice and say that the perpetrators has to be accountable and they have to get the right punishment that they deserve. The other is the Tigrayan diaspora. The Tigrayan diasporans, they have been voice, they have been support for us, and I personally would like to say thank you, because most of the cases that I have been seeing, and then I've been communicating for some during and after the genocide when it was happening in all over Tigray, and they used it as a tool to fight for it, and they feel the pain. They're living really, we're living in the moment and in the situation where you cannot even fulfill your basic needs. Most of the Tigrayans are not fulfilling the necessity or the basic needs that they deserve to survive. And most of the Tigrayan diasporas, they have the privilege to have that opportunity, and yet they are still feeling our pain. They are feeling the pain of the survivors of the genocidal rape. They are feeling the pain of any Tigrayans, even though they have a better life. And I would like to say thank you for not, forgetting about their people because of the situation they have, the better situation they have there. And I'm so grateful for what they have been doing in the past 2 years in general. But I would like to say that we have a huge and a very long journey that we have to go, starting from now, supporting, in my case, the genocidal rape survivors. I've seen what they need, I've seen what they experience, and I know what they're in need of right now. And honestly, I couldn't sleep knowing that they don't have their needs. They need a physical support. They are still suffering from medical things. They didn't get the right amount of medical care that they need. They didn't get the right amount of psychosocial support they need. Economically, they are completely damaged. They don't even have a mattress to sleep. They are sleeping in the ground with their children after surviving a genocidal rape. as I told you earlier, the other social and the religious and spiritual impact that it left on them is they don't have anything to believe in right now. They don't have any hope for it. And there is 4 main multidimensional support that we need to support to provide the genocide and rape survivors. And we have, and I really count on the Tigrayan diasporas to help us on this, to provide the multidimensional support that the genocide and rape survivors in need of. And I would like to add this for the Tigrayan diasporas after experiencing my gratitude and also appreciation for what they have been doing in the whole world. The last thing I would like to say for Ethiopians, for Africans, and for the whole world is that there is a simple learning theory that we have in psychology, and it's called operant conditioning. And it says that any human learns due to conditioning. And this operant conditioning, it has a principle that people learn, any people, especially children, they learn by reward and punishment. So the whole world, we as a human, we learn due to reward and punishment conditioning. So when you get rewarded by doing something, you do that behavior over and over again. And when you get punished for doing something, then yes, you stop doing it, right? This is a simple learning theory. And I think what happened in Tigray, the genocide and rape that I've been sharing with everyone, genocidal atrocities that we cannot finish speaking or writing about. What happened in Tigray in general, I believe that the whole world, Ethiopians, Africans, primarily Ethiopians and then Africans in the whole world, have been rewarding the perpetrators to keep doing it, and they are still doing it, and no one is stopping them, no one is saying anything, no one is taking any appropriate words that they have to stop them. And I believe that we have been rewarding the perpetrators, the defense forces, the different forces in general, the Ethiopian government and the defense force that it uses, the Eritrean government and the troops in the Amhara and different forces. We have been rewarding them to perpetrate what they perpetrated in Tigray, and what are they still perpetrating in Tigray. And I say that we have to stop rewarding such an act. We have to change our principle, and we have to use the operant conditioning, which is the other one, punish them. They have to be accountable for what they did and for what they are still doing, and they have to stop, and they have to be accountable. They have to have a legal consequence, especially for what they did and for what they are still doing. So what I would like to say finally is the Ethiopians, the Africans in the whole world is being a bystander. A bystander is to stand there and to watch simply. So they have to stop being a bystander and take action. That's what.
Can you tell us something about the book you are writing?
Oh, okay. The first thing that I mentioned as a solution is that we have to show what happened in Tigray. All of us who had a privilege, we have to show the whole world that what happened in Tigray, so that it doesn't continue, so that the survivors receive the right amount of service and support they need, and so that it will never be repeated in any areas in the whole world. So that being said, I already wrote a book, and it has been given to the university. Since I'm an academician, I've given it to the university, and it passed an internal evaluation. There's also an external evaluation, and it's going the external evaluation, and after they finish, it will be published soon. The book has been wrote in Amharic and in English. We have an international organization by our side to publish the English version, and we're working on it, and we will recently publish it internationally in the whole international community, and anyone who can read English will be able to read it. That means the other one is there's also another book. It's based on the testimonies and the statements in the patients in their own word, and there are 66 survivors narrating what happened to them and the psychosocial impact it left on them. This book has been wrote in Amharic also. It has been now being translated into Tigrinya. In the German community, there is this university, and we have scholars there. They are also translating it into Germany. So we have 5 books coming recently. Hopefully all 5 of them might be at the same time. It might or it might not be, but as soon as we finish with any of them, I will be able to publish the books that I already wrote. It's 5 of them. It's in Amharic, Tigrinya, English, and Germany. That means the main thing that I am working on, it's not only to show the world what happened, but also to provide the multi-dimensional support the survivors deserve. So recently I'm working on this project. It's a huge project. Many people are participating on it. In the university we're working on the project design. We're working on the project proposal. After we finish that, we will be communicating you, of course. So where we are planning is to have a center in our hospital in the Eider campus, to have a center for sexual violence survivors, genocide or rape specifically survivors, and then this project will have branches, implementing partners and everything. Our plan is honestly to reach to any woman, girl, and children who survive genocide or rape. We will go home to provide the support. We only start working on the project design. That's the goal that we have, as I told you. And we need the Tigrayan diasporas, the international trauma intervention communities. We need the regional sector, and also the regional statement governors, of course, the Ethiopian people and their government. Other than being accountable, of course, they have to be accountable, but we need the people supporting on us, supporting this huge project. So we're working on this. After we finish the project design, we'll be communicating to you, of course, and to the whole community in general. This is the thing that we are doing. If there is anyone, it might be in Tigray, it might be outside Tigray. If there is anyone who would like to support this, they can communicate us. The chairwoman, and they can communicate us, and if they want also, they can stand by themselves and have another project. But we're working on this, and we would like anyone to support us on this one.
Thank you very much, Feven. We had a very fruitful and in-depth interview. Thank you very much.